Reggie's going to talk about his thing on environmental regulations and changes and stuff. And there you go.
Assuming you already saw who I am, I'm going to replace this with this. I'm going to need, so here's my box. Test out my area here. Okay. I just, so we're playing a zone, unlike my team last night. So I assume all I have to do is click up and down. Down, okay. Okay, are we good? So one of the things that being in our position, my group, we have Andrew Moskovich, our environmental engineer, and Kelly, another environmental scientist. One of the things that our position affords us is we hear a lot of the issues that come up from our customers and other people that address the issue of regulatory issues that they run into for practical circumstances. And as a result, we accumulate all these questions and we'll interact with environmental agencies like the EPA or state agencies or other local agencies. And so we get these questions and we save them. And like I said, this situation affords us the opportunity to get the top 5 that we've seen a lot this year. And the purpose of this presentation is just to bring these particular issues to light so that they're not causing problems for future situations. And so we get to these minor mistakes or minor mistakes that you make that can have the potential for major regulatory issues. So the first slide, if I do this right, check me out. I can be taught. Confirm normal operations. The minor mistake is the assumption that QA tests are not affected by auxiliary equipment operations. And a few examples, the heated sample line, sample tubing and sim shelter, vacuum sample pump. One of the problems is I can pass a calibration test or I can pass a linearity, but if you know that these particular pieces of equipment aren't operating normal and you proceed forward, it puts those tests in jeopardy and your data in jeopardy. And so just because you pass a linearity, you pass a calibration test, it does not necessarily mean your data is acceptable. And so if you, a lot of times a site might call us and say, hey, the heated sample line went out, but it's like it's summertime, the temperatures, we're not getting any moisture in the sample line, the data looks good, is it acceptable? And one of the things that we routinely instruct people, if the system isn't operating, because remember under Part 75 and 60, there's the whole presumption that the CEMS is operating under normal conditions, normal operating conditions. And so if either of these situations is jeopardized, now you're running the risk of your data being back invalidated or an issue after an audit or something. And so one of the things, as I say, the major impact, it could impact your QA tests backwards as well as subsequent data. Does that make sense? So one of the things we want to make sure that you're doing is, as you're going through your test, not simply focusing on the QA test itself, but make sure your system is operating normal at the time of those tests. Because you would hate to find out retroactively that these tests had an impact on your data after the fact. Any questions? Next point. Considering constants. One of the things you need to remember when we set up the system, the CEMS system, you have a lot of constants in your settings. And these numbers are very conservative. That means they're higher than they have to be. And so one of the things, especially that you'll run into if you leave those numbers as is, you run into the issue of there's not necessarily you're doing anything wrong, but you're definitely over-reporting. For example, the GCV value that you'll typically see on the site that in our setting is 1100. In most sites that are gas sites, you're operating about, what, 1020, 1050, less than 1050. So now your mass emissions, especially those of you, as I indicate under the major impact, now you're talking about, especially with greenhouse gas, those of you who have to buy your buying credits or you have limits, now you may be exceeding those limits or having to pay more than you have to just because of the GCV value. Or in the case as well as with the density, the fuel density, it's like the lower the higher the density, since it's in the denominator, it can affect the heat input as we calculate it. And so the overall theme here is that you want to make sure that you're holding these numbers accountable. And a lot of you get fuel analysis pretty regularly, so there's no downside to using those values. The values that we provide you are values that have you can trace them back to an EPA source or a documented source. And so we feel comfortable using them as a default, but you're not required to continue using those ongoing. And one of the biggest examples is, and Charlie brought this up at the EPRI conference, a lot of you are still using the original NOx-MER value that was established when you first certified, even though you have plenty of historical data. And usually the initial NOx-MER value is something like, if it's natural gas, it's something like 1.141, or if it's oil, if you have oil as well, it's about 2.41, something like that, pounds per million BTU. And so you can imagine your availability, if data substitution drops below 80%, you're putting in the NOx-MER value, you're putting in these huge values unnecessarily when you could be using more respective numbers. And so this is just, like I said, it's a minor mistake in that you're just allowing things because it's acceptable, but it can have a huge impact on your emissions as well as in exceeding limits. Questions? We're good? This one comes up a lot. Gas cylinder goofs. Minor mistakes are you use the reference value rather than the certified value. Usually it's a technician, they see the value on there and it's a NOx value, and we normally measure NOx, so you put the NOx value in there. But then the NOx value isn't always a certified value. And you use expired cylinder for sites that aren't necessarily checking all the time. And where that can become an issue is, you can imagine I'm using expired cylinder and it drops below the 100 PSI for part 75. Now I can't even take it back to see if it would have been good. And finally, fat finger of reference value. And like you can see in my example here, 9.05, the reference value is 9.5 on a range of 10. You accidentally put in 9.05, you're not paying attention, you adjust the analyzers for the 9.05, you're passing the whole time. You've had times where the calibration was actually 9.0, but it still passes. But then you realize your reference gas was actually 9.5, so you've been failing that calibration the whole time. And now you're retroactive. And so there needs to be something in your system or in your actions that that are a quality assurance way of checking, making sure the numbers put in there correctly before proceeding. Obviously, the major impact, potential to have invalid CIMS QA and hourly data, and the fact that it's unexpected invalid QA test and significant downtime for Part 60. And these, I just wanted to point out a couple of examples just to make you aware. So here's one particular company's search sheet. And you can see in this case, both the NOx and the NO values are both certified. And so if in that particular case, if both are certified, we recommend obviously use the NOx value. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. You can use NO. It's like there's not, regulatory wise, you can use NO, but the analyzer does have the capacity to run the NO, and it can read the NO2 because it converts one to the other and it adds both of them together. And so you have the capacity, but if you, even if both values are certified, you can use the NO value. There's nothing wrong with it.
It doesn't really matter.
It seems to be more often the NO is certified than the NOx. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if I'll just show you in this second slide here, you'll notice here the total NO, the total NOx and the NO. One's definitely an acceptable certified value. That's indicated by, normally you'll have a certain level of uncertainty on the certified value. In this case, they have the 0.3 for the NO. The total NOx doesn't have that uncertainty. And like you can see in this one more slide over, they'll just clearly indicate it's a reference only. But as you saw in the first slide, both values were certified. And if you look in the EPA's technical Q&A manual, it's like the requirement is to use a certified value. And as you indicated, or I'm sorry, you indicated, in more cases, the NO is certified, as we're seeing on these sheets, than both are certified. The issue here is to make sure that you are using a certified value, whichever one you use. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So, fourth one, daily calibration drift errors. That error may seem like an error, but it's not an error. It's meant to highlight the errors that happen during calibration drift. The minor mistake, not considering operational days for 7-day drift test. One of the things that happens at times is a site will find, and it's something we've resolved in our own software just of late. It's like you'll have 7 days of drift. Say you ran days 1 through 8, but on day 2, let's say the turbine trips. And so you didn't run a cal because you never came back up. And so under Part 75, the guidelines require you to start over because you actually ran that day, you actually combusted fuel. It is a unit operating day, even if you operated for, give me one second. Even if you operated for only 3 minutes, it's considered a unit operating day. So the issue comes down to, it's like it'll look like you passed 7-day drift, but because of that day in the middle, you have not. And if you'll notice, I have both 60 and 75. Obviously 60 doesn't clearly make that indication, but it does use the same language, 7-unit operating days or 7 calendar days. So it gives you the same options as 75. So in practice, it needs to follow the same guidelines. And I'll give you a little more clarification on that because we got more clarification from the EPA on that issue. Secondly, not considering dual range analyzer requirements. Part 60 doesn't address dual range analyzers. Part 75, clearly, if you fail on one limit, if you fail on one range, the whole analyzer is out of control. And so similarly, part 60, upon recent clarification, they have the same philosophy. If you fail on one, you fail on both. And the reasoning is that their understanding is that because both ranges use the same detector when you're calibrating, so if you fail one, it's considered out of control. Now, I want to make a distinction between, I don't know if I want to do it on this slide or next slide. I'll make it here. I'll make it next slide. So not considering the range, and then I know historically we've had this issue where Part 60 didn't address the issue, so there was kind of a little bit of hand waving. It's like, does it invalidate data one way or the other? But now we have clear clarification on that. One of the other ones that I brought up last users group, and I feel need to bring it up again, under Part 60, this third bullet, not protecting Part 60 tests with the calibrations. This is one that became a recent issue, and I feel like it needs to be brought up because the question was brought up again this year. And what happens is, under Part 60, if you, let's say day one, you run a calibration. On day one afternoon, you do a RADA. Day two, you run a calibration that fails 4 times the performance spec out of control. Under Part 60, what that requires is that you back invalidate everything to the last pass calibration, which means that RADA that was trapped in between the good calibration becomes no good. And so one of the things that because this question came up and because this is a significant question, one of the things that we've started a process on our webpage, and that's the link of urgent issues. And so what we're trying to do to address these kind of things that come up that have a huge impact like that is we put a place on our website so that you can check these out. But until we get it to the point where our documentation has it all, it's ubiquitous in our documentation already so that you have those things available. But for right now, they're urgent issues that we want to get out quickly. So it's not a bad idea to check our website on occasion to confirm that what those kind of urgent issues are. And I think they're going to have copies of the slides, so that'll be on there. Within our group, it has been put to me that it might be a good idea to have like an established email system set up to send that. And matter of fact, we have a meeting coming up Thursday. And now that you brought the question up in real time, I will revisit it and I won't be as pig-headed in the meeting as I was before. So that's a fair concern. And we will address it, of course, because it's a fair point, because this can be a major issue, and if you didn't check this and you don't have a newer QA manual. So it was on me. I made the call, and so I will fix it. But yeah, that's one of the key things. Like I said, just something as minor as we passed our RADA, we're good, we move on. So what we recommend is right after a major test, even if it's a CGA, run another calibration right then and there so that you don't have to worry about it being retroactive the next day. Because one of the advantages of addressing it when the RADA happens at that point, if you ran the calibration as it fails, as long as everybody's still connecting everything, yeah, there'll be expenses, but you don't have to do resetup and everything. So they're right there on site. And so we highly, strongly, in the greatest words I could say, recommend, especially after a RADA, run a calibration. Just so that this does, especially for part 60. Part 75, it's not really an issue because any calibrations are invalidated forward. 60 is unique in that particular situation. Obviously, the major impacts is unexpected NOVs regarding completion of certification, back invalidation of major QA tests, example CGA RADA, and significant increase in downtime.
You brought this up in the past, I have to bring it up earlier, but now big reference point to it. Let's talk about recertification and running a RADA before running a 7-day drip test for linearity check. Problems. Remember, back validate, back invalidate.
Yeah. So, no, I'm going to take it on. Loosen up, Reg, you can handle this. Your Broncos went down, but you will not. So, here's it. So, and then especially under Part 75, they give you guidelines for when the test should be done. You do a 7-day drift test. You do them in a certain order. And the RADA is the last test you do. And so, having said that, it's like one of the things is, we're talking specifically part 60. If you're doing, the main tests you're going to be doing for part 60 are 7-day drift test, RADA, and maybe a CO cycle time test. One of the ways you can protect yourself from losing each of those tests is once they're completed, running calibrations to address after each of those tests are done. Now you're not back invalidating it. So there's no downside. You'll have extra calibrations in there, but the test will be protected. We've never run into that situation for our service, but this concept does provide reason to do such things if you want to make sure those tests are protected. Does that answer your?
Recertification.
Oh, so recertification. So basically, once again, Part 60 doesn't address it, but that's going to be one of the slides coming up here. Recertification under 60. Likewise, I'm going to wait till we get to that slide because recertification for Part 60 is interesting, and my group, including Shane, you guys know her, Shane, I call her Taylor, she's my daughter. Her and Andrew Moskovich, our environmental engineer, have done extensive work on collecting responses from every state and even local agencies, and you'll see kind of an example of it. And we make it available to all of our customers for each Part 60 site, and it'll be a slide coming up here next, matter of fact. But regarding the urgent issue thing, yes, we will continue to keep it on our page. We will devise, somehow we'll create an email chain to get this out to you quicker, because Dave's point is very valid, because not everyone's going to look on our webpage, and you don't want to wait to do your updates, your QA, if your RADA is coming before then. So that's a fair point. So that's the thing on this one. Any other questions? So one of the major or minor mistakes I've made is presuming presuming acceptable action. And so I want to kind of make a distinction between presumption, guidance, and regulation. This was a kind of a debate within our group. So one of the things that historically we would make the presumption 60 did not address an issue, and based on presentations given by regulatory agencies and others who are involved with regulatory agencies, we came up, there was the ideology presented that regulatory agencies are be a lot more lenient if you give them reasonable reasons for doing things to bring things back in compliance. So our reasonable reasoning for bringing back things into compliance in our brain was, hey, if you follow Part 75 and the principles that they use to bring analyzers and equipment back into compliance, that's a reasonable action. And so that was a presumption based on kind of hearsay. Guidance, we're using that as regulatory agencies specifically provided us with guidance based on regulatory requirements that were available to everyone. So it's not just us as a CIMS provider making it, it's based on the regulatory agency, their personnel saying, this is what we recommend doing based on the regulations available. And then regulations are clear indication of the rules that require you to do X, Y, or Z. And the reason, and so the major impact is like if you're, especially if you're wrong on your presumption, is an agency can come back and say, no, that's wrong. And then you may have potential issues with your data. Here's, as an illustration, several years ago, in the example I gave you with the turbine tripping, and I think, Dave, you and I might have been involved with it. A site had run for 3 days on their 7-day drift test, and then they tripped. They never came, they tripped on the 4th day, and they never came back up. On the 5th day, they came back up, didn't adjust the analyzers, ran the calibrations, everything was fine. The EPA provided us with guidance to say, yeah, you can continue on with the 7-day drift test. And we've used that principle, we've used that guidance for several years. And then recently, someone pointed out to the EPA, hey, but the rule says you have to be operating, you have to run the calibration. And the EPA said, yeah, that's correct. But they didn't penalize anyone retroactively because the information given to us was in good faith based on their understanding. So guidance protects you. The regulations obviously protect you. Presumption may not protect you. And so and that's why I want to make the distinction. So now we went back to all these agencies. We went back to the EPA as well as these state agencies. And we devised Part 60 compliance based on how they presented, how each state wanted to handle. Because when we went to the EPA, the Part 60 portion of the EPA, and we asked them, hey, is it permissible to use Part 75 on Part 60 analyzers because Part 60 doesn't have any guidance on it? And we got our feelings hurt. I got my feelings hurt when they said, no, if something happens to the analyzer, they can, under Part 60, we consider you need to recertify it. And they said, but, and that was the thing that unhurt my feelings, but since the states determine how that's used, they can provide with how it's used. And so what we went back and did is we contacted every state to see what they would have, how they would have us use Part 60 and how they would, if they would allow us to use Part 75. And this is just a quick excerpt of the differences between 60 and 75 and why we reached out to Part 60 portion of the EPA. So this is just a brief, I don't know how well you can see this. I should have used less. But this is just a few of the states that, can you scroll it? Yeah, help out there, just for now. And then I'll have you scroll it over. So basically you can see the EPA stance was we expect it to be basically recertified, but they did allow, and once again, we have all the correspondence with the EPA as well as with each individual state that verify everything that we're providing. And this is on our website as well. So anyone has access to it to pull it up for your individual states, for your individual site. And what you'll find is on here, can you scroll just a little bit so I can see the research? Yeah. So you'll see both the response to both scenarios. One, identifying, recertifying, or bringing an analyzer back into compliance, as well as we broach the topic of using like-kind analyzers. And I would say we found 30 to 35, maybe 40% will allow us to use Part 75 without exception. The greater percentage, there was another pretty good percentage that would allow us to use Part 75 guidelines, but they want you to still contact them. So you could at least start the process and then contact them so you know at least what you're going to do. And then we still have a significant amount of states and agencies that still want you to just contact them and they'll tell you what to do. And the problem we've been really having with, and we've been bantering back and forth with these agencies is, you can imagine a scenario where you're an analyzer or a piece of equipment goes out, it's midnight on Saturday, and you don't know how to bring the analyzer back into compliance. The agency isn't available. You want to do something to address it rather than wait for all of this time, especially if you're running. And so, but some agencies were willing to acknowledge the scenario, and that's why they said, yeah, go ahead and start with the 75 criteria, contact us, and we'll let you know if there's anything else you need to do. But there were still agencies that were like, yeah, just let us know as soon as possible, and then we'll tell you, but by then you could have lots of invalid data. I don't know if we have the, so let me give you a basic example of our campaign. Initially, we went to, I clicked something. Initially, we went through all the states. We didn't go specifically to like certain, like Bay Area and South Coast, but the second campaign, we've gone back through them, and I think we have quite a few of those now. And I don't know if this isn't updated with the latest, is it? Yeah, so we do need to update it with the latest, because we've gotten some, I think Bay Area gave us a pretty nice response. So in Nevada, we ran into that issue where they say we've run into counties where they said, we don't even have CIMS in our county, so we don't address this issue at all. And so, so one of the things, I still think if you at least have a statewide view and you operate on that in principle, I know I'm saying in principle, but at least it's a statewide principle. You're not just, it's not presumption just based on what you've heard. But we do have a lot more agencies, and like I said, when we get that updated, you can look at the site and see what we have now, but we do have more that we just haven't updated to the site. And we'll probably have to go do one more round to, especially for some states are still, I don't know if, have all the states at least responded? Okay. I think we have one from Feather River. And unfortunately, you're going to see that is the answer. Like someone just contact us, but at least you, from our perspective to you, is like now we're not giving you arbitrary contact your state all the time. It may be those occasions where we can say, hey, we already have a response, so it alleviates you from the process because we've already addressed it. Well, so here's my, just kind of as a last point to this topic. If you are contacting agencies, and I hope this sticks in your noggins and your noodles, whatever. If you're contacting state agencies, never ask the question in a way that you want them to answer. Never ask them the question, can we do this? And that's kind of point that Taylor's making here is, and Dave already knows this, he's a veteran. You basically ask the question, Part 75 provides this information on how to do this. Can we use this? As opposed to, can we use 75? Because you're right. They're absolutely going to say, what's 75? You ask it and you provide them with the details what 75 already, because 75 has answered the question already. All they have to say, look over it. And that's where we've gotten a lot of, on our second and third rounds, where we've got response, like, here's what 75, and they've gone in committee, yeah, you can use that. You basically set the question up so they answer it the way you want them to. I'm not saying it always works, but I can guarantee you if you open it up like that, they're going to say, yeah, you're going to have to do a lot more. Yes, yes. And I don't, and I guess I'll bring Walt in. I have no problem with sharing it because when we sent the information out, we sent it out. When we sent our question out, we specifically said we're looking to pass the information on to our customers. So I don't have a problem with sharing the email. It's similar to when we get stuff from the EPA. They're aware of the fact that we're doing this for customers. So just let it. Yeah. Uh-huh. As the EPA has done, as I indicated, Mike. We don't, at this point, we're still at the initial stages right now, just getting answers for it. But that's another fair point that we do need to have kind of an annual audit of ourselves to confirm that that's. Yeah, there's no downside to that. The thing is, though, like I said, in the case with the EPA, especially with the emails we have available, if you were to follow that guidance that they provided, there can't be any consequences to your current testing, at least going backwards, because you're going based on what their agency provided you. And so, yeah, even on the state level, it's like if you're going based on, they provided us knowing that that's how we're using it. And so it becomes, your case becomes a lot stronger protecting your data and your information because that's what they provide. If they change it, they have a certain responsibility to let people know that it's changed. But as far as there, and I'm not dismissing your point. We do need an audit kind of situation that we don't have in place yet. Yeah. Oh, and that's about it. Does anyone have any? Any further questions? I think we're good.